There are a number of reasons why Prime Minister Najib deserves a mandate, his first mandate. And this is something that the voting population should also keep in mind, that he is asking for a mandate for the first time in his long political career. I would regard his management of the economy at a time like this, when the global economy is in crisis. He has managed to ensure that our people have jobs, that incomes are rising, that inflation is under control. He has ensured that the growth rate is at a very respectable level given the regional and global situation, over 5% growth rate. And what is even more significant, that there has been quite a bit of distribution of wealth. And we see this in all the initiatives that he has taken, directed largely at that percentage of the population that earns less than 3,000 ringgit a month. Yes, his affordable housing program, his health clinics, his program for school children, for university students. He has got his program for taxi drivers and senior citizens and single mothers, and for civil servants, for people involved in the retail trade, people involved in microcredit financing, the whole works. I think almost every single sector of society has benefited directly or indirectly from his ventures, various programs that he has initiated. And we must also keep in mind that one of our challenges for a long while has been this widening gap between what I call the have-a-lot and the have-a-little. And in the last 3 years, even that widening gap has been narrowed, because the latest figures show that our Gini coefficient on incomes has been improved to a great extent. At one time, I think in 2009, it was 0.441, and now it is 0.431, given that zero is perfect equality. So I think we are making some progress. And I would say that there has been a great deal of planning, very careful implementation of various plans and programs. And this is something which has been there for quite a long while, though Najib, I think, has given much greater emphasis to economic transformation in the last 3 or 4 years. But looking after the economy has been very much a part of the government's approach to nation building from the earliest years, which is why over a period of 55 years we have had an average growth rate of about 7%, and most of it has been directed towards helping bring about this transformation. I think it is very significant that Malaysia is perhaps one of the very few countries in the global south which consistently has spent about 25% of its development expenditure on education. 25% of its development expenditure on education. Compare this to a number of other countries, our neighbors, and also countries elsewhere. You find that education takes up a much smaller portion of the development expenditure. In some instances, they spend much bigger portions of their expenditure upon the military. So in that sense, I think we have done a fairly good job.
Excellent. Well, you made a lot of great points about the economy, but what else does Najib bring to the table, which is worth mentioning?
Well, Niall, if you look at the way in which he has managed ethnic relations, again, he has continued a tradition that we have had for quite a long while in maintaining ethnic relations on an even keel, a certain equilibrium that he has observed. And he has perhaps strengthened the basis of ethnic relations in a couple of ways. In the last few years, there has been a concerted attempt to recruit more non-Malays into the civil service, because civil service had become preponderantly Malay, which is not a healthy sign in a multi-ethnic society. And the same thing with the military and the police. There have been very specific programs to recruit more non-Malays. And he has also appointed non-Malays to very senior positions in the public service. Like, for the first time we have a non-Malay heading our Securities Commission, which is, as you know, one of the most powerful institutions in the country dealing with finance and the economy. And he has also, through One Malaysia, tried to popularize this idea that we are one as a nation, as a people, in very concrete ways. One Malaysia housing, One Malaysia clinics, One Malaysia school textbook assistance, and all the rest of it. Why? Because he's trying to sort of de-emphasize ethnicity. This is a very concrete expression of making people feel that in all these areas of social life, of public life, we are one as a people. And even if you look at microcredit scheme, which had an ethnic dimension at one time, this is the Tekun scheme. Today you find that it has been opened up to everyone, and there are a lot of poor Indians who are also beneficiaries of the Tekun scheme. So this is yet another attempt to bring people together. So I think there is an attempt to emphasize unity. This is one of his achievements. He has also, I think, done a fairly good job of maintaining peace and stability, even if you took into account what had happened in Lahad Datu recently. But all said and done, there is, I think, peace and stability in the country compared to many other countries. And Najib, I think, should also be credited with introducing significant political reforms. He's got rid of the Internal Security Act. He has amended the University Colleges Act to allow for student participation in the political process. He has also amended the Publications Act to get rid of that sword of Damocles that was hanging over the heads of editors every time, becoming a little apprehensive when it comes to the renewal of their license and so on. And he has also, I think, promised to abolish the Sedition Act and replace it with the National Harmony Act. So there are efforts of that sort as far as political reforms go. Greater space, more participation, strengthening the democratic process. And to this, I think one should also add the changes that have been introduced to certain laws. We now have a Peaceful Assembly Act, which gives meaning to Article 10 in the Constitution. We have also made very significant changes to electoral laws in the country to make them more transparent, to make the whole electoral process more accountable. 22 reforms that have been adopted by Parliament. And one tends to forget sometimes that he has also done something which is very, very significant as far as UMNO is concerned. He has abolished the delegate system of voting, which was a source of both political control and corruption in the party. Now, a huge number of UMNO members will be able to vote directly for the party leadership. And that, I think, is also a significant change. And we should also perhaps now give some attention to his attempts at the regional level to sort of enhance peace within the region, the role that he had played in the Bangsamoro Manila Agreement, and also now he's trying to give a helping hand, if you like, to the Thai government in trying to work out some sort of agreement between the Thai government and the rebels in the southern part of the country. So there are efforts of this sort which I think should be commended.
A lot of Malaysians today are still very much opposed to Najib and the Barisan Nasional. Why do you think this is?
There is this perception that Prime Minister Najib has not done enough to curb corruption in the country. I personally feel that elite corruption is still a challenge in Malaysia. We can't run away from that fact. And there is also petty corruption in the country which must be combated. a lot has been done to fight corruption in the last few years, especially in terms of institutional efforts, what we call the process of building institutional mechanisms to curb corruption, special courts, changes in laws, and integrity pacts and all the rest of it. But somehow I feel that it's not enough. As someone who is directly involved in this process, I'm a member of the Institute Integrity's Board of Directors, I personally think that we should focus much more on curbing corruption at the level of politicians, both federal and state politicians, and also perhaps curbing corruption in the private sector, some of the big corporate actors and so on. And that will require a bit of time. And Najib, if I may say this very candidly, I think should also pay quite a bit of attention to the people around him in trying to fight corruption. He should also be concerned about lifestyles. Sometimes elites, their opulent, extravagant lifestyles tend to breed venality, and it tends to encourage acts which betray moral rectitude. I think this is why one should pay attention to this challenge. And then, of course, people talk about crime rates in the country. The government is doing quite a bit, but more can be done. Perhaps placing more police personnel in the hot spots, using some of the equipment that are available today in trying to combat crime. I think we should use those equipments more effectively. I think we should do things of that sort. But at the end of the day, there is, I think, a problem of perception here. And maybe in the perception battle, the BN has not been as effective as the opposition in trying to mold certain perceptions or misperceptions of the people in power. And this may be related to something much deeper. And this is what I think we should also be concerned about, how perceptions are molded and why they're molded in a certain way, and who may be part of this attempt to mold and shape perceptions in a certain way.
Can you go a little bit more into detail about that? I mean, who's exactly shaping these anti-BN mood within these certain circles?
Well, I think there are perhaps forces which are working on very deep-seated emotional grievances and sentiments within the body politic. And maybe we should perhaps look at those sentiments first, and then look at the hidden hands behind those sentiments. What do I mean by these sentiments? Amongst a lot of Muslims in the country, there is this feeling that the panacea to all our ills is an Islamic state, Sharia, and hudud. It would solve everything. There is a very superficial understanding of Sharia within certain segments of Malaysian society. There is this attempt to project hudud, which is basically the penal code in Islamic jurisprudence. There is an attempt to project hudud as the be-all and end-all, as the defining attribute of Islam. And I think this is a terrible injustice, a travesty of justice to a great civilization, and which should not be defined in terms of just its penal code, you know. So I think there is this mentality that is fairly strong amongst a very big segment of Malaysian Muslims that Islam, that's a solution, therefore support PAS, the Islamic Party, and everything will be okay. And you have not only young people who are taken in by this tide, you also have retirees who feel, you know, after they had served in various capacities, they have now retired and they feel that this is the way to get closer to God, to support an Islamic party, because that Islamic party stands for purity in the religion and all the rest of it. This is the reason why I feel that there is a great need for people to understand what the situation really is. I think there are two fundamental questions Muslims have to ask. Number one, look at all those countries which have embarked upon this path, who have proclaimed an Islamic state and talk about Sharia and implementing Sharia laws and so on as part of this fascination with a very narrow interpretation of the religion in relation to state power. Look at their situation. Look at Sudan. Look at Saudi Arabia. Look at Afghanistan, which is an extreme example. Even if you look at Iran, in spite of some of its successes, overall you find that there is a problem of interpretation of the religion. So this is something that we have to keep in mind, you know, and more important, look at how it impacts upon human beings in the concrete sense. Look at what it has done to women in a number of countries which have embarked upon this adventure. Why is it that they do not emphasize the importance of the woman in society? Just a few days ago we had a huge gathering that the Prime Minister had addressed, talking about the role of women and proudly projecting various statistics that show that women in Malaysia played a very significant role. Do you think that an Islamic party would do that? That they would proudly tell the world, you know, this is what we have done for women, that we have 8 Secretary Generals of Ministries who are women, that 30 out of 62 judges in the country are women. They would not even want to talk about things like this, and I don't think these things would happen under that sort of regime. So this is what we have to understand at very concrete level. And even in terms of the economic transformation that has taken place in this country since Merdeka, if it was the Islamic Party that was at the helm, I do not think this sort of changes would have happened, because the priorities are different. Whenever they're in power, you'll find that they don't talk about water and electricity and jobs and reducing poverty. Their emphasis is very often on attire, on the intermingling of sexes, and on cultural shows, and how much flesh is revealed. These are the things that they are really obsessed with. So we have to understand this, that this mood, this drive, Islamic State, panacea for all our problems, this is an illusion. It is a misinterpretation of the religion that is happening, and we must be bold enough to say that this does not serve the interests of Muslims at all, let alone the non-Muslims. And you will find that among the non-Muslims there is a similar emotional wave which is carrying them forward. And what is that emotional wave? Amongst quite a lot of Chinese, for instance, and a segment of the Indian population, especially the educated ones, they're saying, well, there's been so much injustice against us, inequality, we're second-class citizens, and now we are going to break that yoke. We are going to free ourselves, liberate ourselves from this injustice. And the only way we can do that is by supporting the opposition, by supporting the DAP and the Parti Keadilan Rakyat and so on. Here again, look at the realities. Just as in the case of the Muslims, we say, be sober, be rational, look at the realities. There are certain things that you cannot change through the ballot box, and that is a fact. Article 153, the special position of the Malays and Bumiputras of Sabah and Sarawak, it is an entrenched clause, which you cannot change through the ballot box or through Parliament. It is protected by the rulers, we know that. So if that's what you're concerned about, it's not going to change, just because you vote in the opposition. If on the other hand you're concerned about some of the abuses of Article 153, some individuals using it for their own purpose, and you're concerned about how it has impacted upon some of the non-Muslims who also deserve help, I think those things can be changed. Attempts are being made to change those things, which is why you have various programs and various policies now that are attempting to overcome some of those injustices connected with the implementation of Article 153. But more than that, let us look at the reality. If you're talking about economic equality, and you look at the position of the Chinese community in particular, the Chinese community is the most significant community in the upper echelons of our economy. It is the most significant community at the middle level of our economy. The Chinese community is very poorly represented at the bottom of the nation's economy. If you're talking of cultural equality, you find that manifestations of Chinese culture, from its language to education, they are very much a part of our landscape. In fact, there is no other country in the world outside China and Taiwan where you have Chinese culture and Chinese education expressed the way it is expressed in this country. It's such an important component of our national landscape. So what inequality are you talking about from that perspective? And if you look at politics, given the historical background of the country, don't forget that Malaya in 1957 emerged from Malay sultanates. Given this political background to the country, Malay polity is the historical genesis of the Malaya and Malaysia that we know today. With that as the background, if you look at the participation of non-Malays and the Chinese and Indians and others in Malaysian politics, it has been quite remarkable.
Do you see a foreign hand at work in the electoral battle this time between the Bien and Pakatan?
Well, Nal, if you look at some of the issues that confront the electorate and the personalities who are involved, one should not be surprised that there are other forces from outside Malaysia who are trying to manipulate the situation. We know of the connections between the leader of the opposition and some of these elements. We know of his links, for instance, with the neocons in the United States of America, and we also know that he has been given a great deal of publicity in the mainstream Western media. They've been sort of trying to bolster his position. Even very recently, if you look at the angle taken by some leading television stations reporting on Lahad Datu, or their reports on some other incidents, you can see the bias. So it's obvious what they are driving towards. And then, of course, you have the National Endowment for Democracy and its direct and indirect involvement, the involvement of the Open Society Institute and its affiliates in NGOs and the activities that these NGOs have been involved in the country. And you also have what I think is not that obvious to a lot of people. If you look at the way in which certain issues are created, the way in which whatever good is happening is tarnished, the way in which, for want of a better term, the way in which black propaganda is working in the country. There is, I think, this hidden hand that's responsible for black propaganda. And we've seen it in other situations. We're not just talking of situations like Venezuela, the last presidential election, where black propaganda was so obvious. It was also obvious in the case of Russia, in the recent elections in Russia. And even in other countries. If you look at Sri Lanka, you look at the Indonesian polls some time ago, you find that other forces are involved. And it's only after the event that people begin to reflect on certain episodes and say, this is a little bizarre. And this is what's happening in the country. There is no doubt at all that there is a concerted attempt to tarnish anything and everything done by the government, and even issues where the opposition had at one time taken a certain position, and they had played a role in making the people aware of, say, how terrible the Internal Security Act was. But the moment it is abolished, you find that the opposition takes a different position. I mean, this is very typical of people who have certain objectives in mind. It's part of this whole black propaganda machine and the way in which it works. So you tarnish everything, you create the impression that everything is damned, and at the same time, when it comes to the other side, you sort of present them as angels, that everything is good and all the rest of it, and you have various NGOs, segments of the media working towards that objective, and you can see it, the way in which it's done. So I'm not surprised that the foreign hands, and it's not just one hand, I think, various foreign hands are involved, and they want a certain outcome as far as this election is concerned, and it's linked to larger issues that we have talked about before. I always emphasize this, it's not just Israel and Zionism and all the rest of it, which is one of the concerns, because Malaysia has been very explicit in its support for the Palestinian cause, and there are people who don't like that. They don't like Prime Minister Najib's visit to Gaza, for instance, because they see it as an endorsement of the Hamas position and all the rest of it. We are aware of all that, but I think the really important concern is China. There's no doubt about it. The US is looking for allies in this region, and they want to be absolutely certain that these allies will protect their interests vis-a-vis the Straits of Malacca, the South China Sea. They want to be absolutely certain that in this network that they are building, Malaysia and the Malaysian leadership would be part of that network. That includes perhaps leaders in some other countries. There are those who are very, very close, like the Australian elite, very close to Washington's interests, but you also have others like the Philippine elite. I'm not talking of President Benigno Aquino III in particular. I'm talking of the elite that exists in the Philippines, and they're very close ties with Washington. And I suppose if you look at the Singapore elite, they're also very close to Washington. So there are all these concerns, and it's very important for them that in this election, the outcome will be what they have been working towards all these years.
Now, as a Malaysian voter, what do you think the outcome will be of the 13th general election, and how do you see this result impacting upon the future of the nation?
It's very difficult to predict elections. We really don't know what the verdict would be, but a lot of the polls, a lot of the analysts seem to suggest that the Barisan Nasional will win. What the margin would be, one cannot really be certain. Some people say that it could be anything between, say, the Barisan Nasional securing 120 seats to perhaps 152 seats. We really don't know. A lot will depend on what happens in the last 1 week after Parliament's dissolved and the campaign starts. That would also determine the eventual outcome. But whatever the outcome, if you look at a BN victory on the one hand and a Pakatan victory on the other hand, I think there are certain scenarios which are obvious to us. If it is a Pakatan victory, I think we are going to be embroiled in the politics of identity, much more than we have been all these years. Of course, this has been so much a part of our landscape, but in the future, what's going to happen is you will have an Islamic party which would want to tell its constituency that this is what it's doing. And it will be those concerns which we have talked about that would be pushed to the foreground. And they would say, look, these are Islamic credentials. And you'll have the DAP sort of saying, well, we are tending to all your so-called grievances, and this is what we're doing to bring about the equality that you want. So there would be, I think, a lot of ethnic-based, religious-based politics coming to the fore. And we must keep this in mind, that issues pertaining to religion in the Malaysian context, both religion vis-a-vis the Muslims themselves, issues like how one lives one's faith in the 21st century, these are issues that have not been resolved. Not just in Malaysia, but in many other countries. But the moment you privilege a political party which claims to speak on behalf of the religion, you can be absolutely certain that it would be speaking on behalf of a particular interpretation of that religion. And all other interpretations will be set aside. And that is going to be suicidal for the Muslims, because those who believe in, say, a more inclusive, universal approach to the religion, who have a different view about women and minorities and so on, they're going to feel the heat. And in the case of the non-Muslims, the non-Malays, when they push this notion of Malaysian identity, which doesn't take into account the history and background of the country, you find there'll be a lot of unhappiness on the other side, and there's going to be a reaction. So you can expect some tensions in that sort of situation. Yeah? And it is not enough for people to say, oh, it doesn't matter, they'll be focusing upon issues of governance. Governance in a multi-religious, multi-ethnic society must include issues pertaining to religion and ethnicity. And besides, even in terms of governance, if you look at the track record of the opposition parties, I don't think it is something that one can shout about. There are numerous issues that have emerged in the last 4 or 5 years pertaining to management of the environment, water, issues pertaining to contracts, licenses, and all the rest of it. So what are we talking about? Yeah? So we have to keep that in mind. In the case of the BN, you can be certain of, I suppose, the economy in terms of its economic transformation plan, the government transformation plan. Things have been put in place. So there is perhaps a certain degree of confidence that the BN would be able to exude about the immediate future. But having said that, I think it would be incumbent upon all of us, it would be our responsibility as citizens to raise a number of issues about the future if the BN is returned to power. Number one, I would be very concerned about continuing the fight against corruption. Number two, I would be very concerned about wanting to close the gap between the have-a-lot and the have-a-little, because much more can be done in that sphere. I'd be very concerned about strengthening the foundations of national integration. We are moving in a certain direction, but let's strengthen those positive signs even further. We have to do that. I'd be very concerned about some of the compromises we seem to have made, the BN government has made in relation to foreign policy. We should be much clearer about what the future is, what the concerns are in this region, in the world as a whole. So foreign policy, I think the direction should be much clearer. And in particular, I am concerned about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I don't think Malaysia should sign on to this partnership because it is full of pitfalls, and we should make the people aware of those pitfalls, from pharmaceuticals to procurements to other larger concerns like wanting to keep China out of the TPP and all the rest of it. So I think it is so important for us to understand these things. So my attitude towards the BN, if it wins, would be I would like to remain a very critical but concerned and caring commentator, saying, look, certain things are right, but there are things that are wrong, and we must speak up. We must never cease to tell the truth. Never cease to speak the truth to power.